everyone, I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to help you fall asleep with these horror stories from the night shift. So, before we start, make sure you subscribe to the channel and like the video. I'd love to know where you're from and what time you're watching this, so leave a comment. When you're ready, make yourself comfortable and relax. Well, I have to tell you this story that happened to me when I was 25. I was a guy who was still looking for his place in the world. This was just before I became the successful real estate agent I am today. At the time, I didn't have a fancy car or the opportunity to travel around like that. No, I was in the early stages of my life and still felt a bit like a child. But there is one experience that I will never forget. And although I didn't know it then, it helped to shape my character. I had recently graduated and honestly I felt a bit lost. All my friends were starting to find good jobs, while I was wandering around aimlessly. The typical story. I spent a month looking for work, but nobody would give me a chance because guess what? I had no experience. How are you supposed to get experience if nobody will hire you? It was a never-ending cycle. After a while, I realized that looking for a decent office job wasn't my thing. So I decided to open up to new options. That's when I saw an ad for a job at a convenience store. It wasn't a big deal, but they needed someone for the night shift. To be honest, it didn't bother me at all, as I like staying up late, so I went ahead and went to the interview. The meeting with the shop owner was, how should I put it, a bit weird. He wasn't your typical employer asking the usual questions like, where do you see yourself in 10 years? Or why do you want to work here? No. This guy was pretty quiet, and I almost ended up doing most of the talking. I started telling him about my degree and how I was a great teammate and all that. Things you say in every interview. But as I looked at him, I realized that he didn't seem to be in the conversation. His eyes were lost in nothingness, and I didn't know if he was really paying attention to me. I felt like I was talking to a wall, and when I finally finished my monologue, he told me I could start on Monday. Yes, just like that. I couldn't believe my good luck, so I thanked him and held out my hand to shake it, but the guy didn't even notice. I just said goodbye and left. On my first day at work, I met a guy called Mike, who was a bit older than me, and was there because he was leaving his job. He was nice and showed me everything I needed to know, but before he left, he made a comment that got me thinking. Hey, the owner is a bit weird. Sometimes I'd catch him talking to himself, and other times he'd just stare at the customers with a strange expression. Just watch your back. That was advice I honestly wasn't expecting. I immediately thought I'd had enough of that warning. Working the night shift was already dark and lonely enough, but what I began to notice from my first day was how the owner was always watching me. He was just there, watching my every move without saying a word. And at first I thought it was because he wanted to make sure I was doing my job properly, but that gaze became increasingly uncomfortable. Most nights the guy would come over to the till and mutter something, but I couldn't understand him. It was like he was talking to himself, just above a whisper, looking past me. It was really disturbing, to be honest. Also, I found out from Mike that the owner had a wife, but she wasn't in the shop and that he stayed there late, avoiding going home. I didn't know why, but it seemed that he was only interested in observing, as if he were trapped in a loop. One day, he simply didn't show up. I don't know if it was luck or chance, but that night I felt a strange relief, but that feeling quickly faded. The shop was still unsettling, even if the boss wasn't there, so I was constantly looking at my watch, wishing the shift would end as soon as possible. When I finally closed the shop that night, I was overcome with nervousness. And the thing is that even though the owner wasn't there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I just couldn't put my finger on what it was. It was as if the place had become a little darker, a little stranger. I was very used to seeing the owner in the shop, although he always gave me a bad feeling. But when he didn't show up during those days, I felt that something was definitely not right. I tried to convince myself that maybe he was on vacation or something, hoping to have some peace and be able to do my job without that feeling of being watched that made my hair stand on end. For 4 days, The place was more normal without him, and the pressure was off. I was able to serve customers and do what I had to do without his gaze stuck on my back, and that was very liberating. On the 5th day, however, I got a chill when I got to work and saw his car parked in the parking lot. He's finally back, I said to myself with annoyance. I thought maybe he needed a break, something I wasn't going to worry too much about since, to be honest, he never talked to me. I went into the shop and there he was, sitting in his chair. But something didn't add up. It was strange before, but now he looked completely different, as if the world had worn him down in just a few days. He looked haggard, with big bags under his eyes and pale skin. I approached and greeted him, but he didn't even look at me. He just stood there, staring into space, as if his mind were elsewhere. The only time he moved was when he got up to go to the bathroom, and as he walked, I noticed that there was something strange about one of his shoes. They were brown leather shoes, and one of them had a dark red stain, maybe blood. I didn't dare ask him, because he never answered me anyway. I also saw that he had a bandage on one of his fingers, and some blood was coming out of the sides. Just before he entered the bathroom, I saw him take something out of his bag, wrapped in paper. It was long and looked metallic, and at that moment, my mind played a trick on me and made me see a knife. It can't be, I thought, but that image remained etched in my mind. After my shift, I went home feeling exhausted. I had no idea why I was so tired, but all I needed to do was get into bed. So I turned on the TV and started changing channels when suddenly a live news report caught my attention. The reporter said that a woman had been found brutally murdered in her home. She had been stabbed with a large carving knife, and although she had tried to defend herself, she had been overpowered by the killer. The reporter said that the husband was in shock and was not talking to the police, who were still searching for the culprit. And to my surprise, the husband was none other than my boss. I was shocked. And while I was in bed, I remembered the object I had seen in the shop, the bloodstain on her shoe and the cut on her finger. It was like a bolt of electricity going through me with each piece of the puzzle falling into place. I realized then that all the signs pointed to one conclusion. The shop owner was the killer. My heart raced at the thought of it. So here I was, living in fear of working under the same roof as someone capable of that. I thought of all those times he had been there, watching me with that empty gaze. Without a doubt, my new reality had become more terrifying than I could have imagined. As you can imagine, that was my last day of work. That same night, I called 911 to anonymously tell them what I had seen. The next day, my boss was arrested, and after being subjected to intense interrogation, he ended up confessing to the crime. Needless to say, that was the last time I set foot in that store. And while it took me almost a month to get another job, I'm glad that at least justice has been done. I work in a small pharmacy in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where nothing exciting ever happens. I'm in charge of the night shift, which is pretty relaxed, and I almost always have time to catch up on a few things as long as I keep an eye on the door. Most of the customers are familiar. Taxi drivers coming in for a Red Bull, neighbors with a headache in the middle of the night, or kids who want a pack of condoms and things like that. It was Tuesday night, and as always, everything was calm. The automatic door opened and closed from time to time, letting in some half-asleep customer. The usual routine enveloped me like a coat, and the hum of the lights together with the murmur of the refrigerator made me feel like I was in a trance. I was reorganizing some shelves with medicines when suddenly the door opened again. A tall woman with an unkempt appearance entered, tangled hair, clothes that looked more like rags than garments, and a smell of sweat and grime. At first, I thought she was a vagrant, but there was something strange about her gaze, something I couldn't identify at the time. Her eyes were like two empty spaces on her face, and her skin, with a grayish tone, gave the impression that she was sick. She was looking around, but she didn't seem to know exactly what she was looking for. "Do you need something?" I asked her from the counter, trying to sound friendly. She didn't say anything right away. She just started to move slowly, as if it were difficult for her. Then she looked up and her cold eyes sent a chill down my spine. "Do you have anything different?" she muttered in an almost inaudible voice. I didn't understand what she meant, so I tried to explain. "Everything we have is on the shelves, but if you're looking for something in particular, I can help you find it." She just looked at me with a crooked smile, as if she knew something I didn't. Then she turned and shuffled out. The door creaked louder than usual as it closed, and silence fell once more. That night I was left with a strange feeling, but I tried to ignore it and get on with my day. A few days passed and I couldn't get that woman out of my mind. The way she walked and the way she looked at me made my nerves go on edge. But I tried to convince myself that she was just a vagabond having a bad day, although there was a part of me that couldn't stop thinking that there was something darker behind her presence. A week later, around 2 in the morning, the door opened again and there she was, standing in the doorway, looking at me. This time her clothes were even dirtier, full of dark stains that could be mud or maybe dried blood. Who knows? Her eyes were still those empty, lifeless pits, and I noticed a slight tremor in her hands. She stared at me without moving a muscle. She walked slowly to one of the corridors and stood there, looking at a row of jars. "Do you need help?" I asked, trying to sound relaxed, and she slowly turned her head to look at me. For a moment, her features seemed even paler to me, almost transparent under the fluorescent light. She didn't reply, she just looked at me with those empty eyes, and suddenly, without warning, she turned and left the pharmacy, leaving a gust of icy air behind her. Fear settled inside me like a stone, and I had the feeling that something was wrong and that I couldn't ignore its presence. So I decided to talk to my boss the next day, tell him all about it, and hope he would take some kind of action. I told my boss what had happened, hoping he would do something about it. Maybe put up more cameras or hire someone to keep watch at night. But my supervisor just laughed and told me not to worry, that I was just another crazy person on the street. "If she bothers you again, call the police, but we're not going to spend money on a guard just for a vagrant," he said. His words did not reassure me in the least, but I had no choice but to continue working. A few days passed with nothing unusual happening, and I began to relax, thinking that maybe the woman wouldn't come back. But of course, I was completely wrong. It was Friday night and the pharmacy was emptier than usual. I was at the back, restocking some shelves, when I heard the door open. I turned and there she was, in the middle of the aisle, looking at me with those empty eyes. This time, her clothes were in tatters, and she had reddish stains on her hands and face. She looked thinner, almost skeletal. "Who are you?" I asked her, my voice sounding shakier than I wanted it to. She smiled again, that crooked smile that made my blood run cold. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, motionless, and I felt a cold sweat run down my forehead, and my heart began to beat like crazy. I took a couple of steps back, looking for my phone to call the police, but when I looked again, she was gone. She had disappeared as if she had never been there. I ran to the door, but the street was dark and silent. I went back to the shop, locked the door, and made sure everything was safe. I couldn't sleep that night. Every noise made me jump and every shadow seemed to move. The following nights were a living hell. The woman never reappeared, but the feeling that someone was watching me never went away. I kept looking towards the door, expecting to see her enter at any moment. The shop, which had previously been a place of routine and tranquility, had become a terrifying place. Finally, I made the decision to resign because I couldn't bear the tension any longer. I handed my resignation letter to my supervisor, who looked at me with surprise and a little contempt, but didn't try to stop me. As I left the pharmacy for the last time, I felt an immense relief, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. That same night, as I walked to my car, I felt that someone was following me. I quickened my pace, and suddenly, I saw her standing on the corner of the street, looking at me with those dead eyes. I didn't wait to see what she was going to do. I ran like never before. I got into my car and took off at full speed, and as I drove away, I saw her through the rearview mirror, standing under the light of a street lamp, her disheveled figure silhouetted against the darkness. Since then, every time I pass by that pharmacy, I look around, expecting to see that thin figure and those empty eyes. I don't know who that woman was or what she wanted, but something inside me tells me that she wasn't just a vagrant. There's something else, something I can't understand. And even though I try to forget on the darkest nights when the silence is absolute, I can still feel her gaze fixed on me, as if she were looking for the right moment to reappear. I remember that it was so cold tonight that I was sinking deeper and deeper into my coat. It was a freezing night, and looking at the clock, I saw that it was 11:40 p.m. I was the only one awake in the motel apart from the security guards. I always worked the night shift here because I needed more than one job to cover my bills and lead a more or less comfortable life. I decided it was time for a distraction, so I grabbed the novel I was reading and let myself be carried away by the story. Suddenly, the tinkling of a bell at the front door broke my concentration. I looked up and saw a guy entering with a briefcase. He looked pretty tired. I was too, but I smiled at him and said, "Welcome, how can I help you?" The man stared at me and said loudly, "A room?" I replied, "Sure, what kind of room are you looking for?" And then he walked towards the counter with a somewhat disturbing look and muttered, "Whichever one is quiet," as he looked at me through the glass with unblinking eyes. His expression was hard, as if he had been taught to smile in a strange way, and his gaze was so cold that it made my skin crawl. In that moment, I was truly grateful that there was glass separating us. There was an opening in the glass of the counter through which I could hand him the key, so I handed it over. "It's the last room on the first floor on the left," I said. He signed his name as David, collected the keys, and went upstairs without saying anything else. What a strange character, I thought. The next day, David turned up at the motel around the same time as the night before, and once again, he was carrying his briefcase. I wondered what kind of work he had that kept him so busy and out so late. I started to call him David the creepy guy because it amused me. I greeted him when he came in, but he just gave me a withering look and went straight to his room. I thought to myself, wow, good manners are not easy to find these days. At 24, life was really starting to seem a bit boring, so I was determined to make every day interesting, which is why I read novels. They allowed me to escape to worlds where anything was possible. My job at the motel wasn't stressful at all. There were only a handful of people who spent the night, but I was convinced that there was something strange about Dave. He always looked at me as if I had done something wrong to him, and the worst thing was that I had to greet him every time he came in, and every time he gave me his look of contempt. 3 days of this had already passed, and the truth is, it was starting to make me nervous. Just then, the phone on my desk rang. I answered with a cheerful voice, but there was no initial response. I heard someone breathing on the other end, and when I almost decided to hang up, he finally said, "I need dinner. Send the food to my room." It was David. My mood automatically turned sour. I looked at the time and realized it was already midnight, so I explained that we didn't offer that kind of service at the motel. I told him he could order something and I would bring it to him, but he hung up without saying anything. How can he expect to have dinner at this time, I thought, but that was the first time he had said a whole sentence to me. David was definitely ruining my days. Just the day before, he had called saying that he needed someone to do his laundry. I told him we didn't do that service either, and when I suggested he take it to a laundrette, he just hung up again. The phone rang again and I knew it was him, and without wanting to answer it, I picked it up anyway, smiling even though I didn't feel like it. What is it now? I thought, but I just said, "How can I help you, sir?" "The tap in my bathroom is broken," he replied, and just like before, he hung up. His attitude was really pissing me off, and I don't even have a dick. Anyway, I tried to keep calm and went up to David's floor, took a look at the tap and told him I couldn't check anything because I wasn't a plumber, but that the management would send someone in the morning. "But I need water now," he shouted in a threatening tone. That gave me the creeps, because this man was really scary. But I swallowed my fear and told him there was nothing I could do and that he should be patient, and I left. But as soon as I got to my desk, the phone started ringing. And of course it was him. David complained, with his now customary few words, that I should send someone to solve the problem now, but I repeated that I was not a plumber, and that he should wait until the morning, when management could send someone qualified to deal with the matter. Before he could reply, I hung up with a feeling of victory that made me laugh. I returned to my novel, eager to find out if the protagonist would finally have the courage to reclaim the throne her brother had stolen from her. And that was when I heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. I looked at the time and saw that it was 1 a.m., and I wondered what the new visitor to the motel wanted now. There were only 7 people staying at the motel at the time. Suddenly, I saw David approaching with a baseball bat in his hand and an attitude that didn't seem like he was a good friend. But before I could react, he threw the bat against the glass of the counter and shattered it. I screamed in fear at that moment and covered my face, waiting for the impact of the shards of glass. "I'm going to kill you," he shouted, while I was trembling with fear. His fierce gaze said it all, and I swear I had never been so terrified. The security guards used to patrol all night, so I hoped they would hear the noise, but there was no sign of them. Then David came over and tried to grab me, but I managed to push his hand away and ran toward the reception desk. If I can escape, maybe I can get away from him, I thought as I felt the adrenaline flowing like a torrent through my body. But David was still following me with the bat in his hand. Suddenly, I felt a hard blow to the back of my head and I fell to the floor, holding my head as a sharp pain invaded me. But before I could react, he grabbed me by the hair and started to drag me down the corridor. I kicked and struggled with all my strength, calling for help, but his grip was like an iron trap. "You must have enjoyed making me angry, haven't you? Do you think you can rule the world with your blonde hair and your beautiful eyes?" he said senselessly. In shock, I wondered what my hair had to do with the situation. This guy was definitely completely crazy. I started screaming at the top of my lungs, "Help! Please help me!" But I only received another blow to the head. "Shut up," he growled. I tried to bite his wrist to free myself, and to my surprise, I succeeded. He let go of me, and moaning in pain, I crawled towards the entrance, which was my only means of escape. Thank God I managed to stand up, and while running half-hobbling, I barely made it to the door. But just when I thought all was lost, I felt a hand on my waist. I screamed like crazy, thinking that David had caught me, and my terrified voice echoed all over the place. But when I looked back and saw Steve, one of the security guards, holding a gun, I felt a wave of relief like never before. Steve hit David on the head with the butt of his gun, leaving him on the floor, knocked out. "Are you okay?" he asked me, his face showing considerable concern. But I couldn't manage to say a word. I was paralyzed with fear and dazed from the blow to my head. Steve handcuffed David and made sure everything was under control before calling the police. While the officers arrived, I told them, trembling, what had happened, and wrapped myself in the blanket they gave me, feeling in a state of shock. The next day, I quit my job at the motel. No job was worth risking my life. I worked at the gas station right off Route 15. It wasn't the most exciting job in the world, but at least it helped pay the bills. Most nights the place was quiet, just me, the hum of the ceiling lights, and the occasional trucker passing by. I liked the solitude. I could be alone with my thoughts, but everything changed with those damn calls. It all started a few weeks ago. It was rare for the phone to ring so late, so when it finally did, it gave me a fright. As I answered, I was hoping it was someone who was only joking or had dialed the wrong number. "Is this Luke?" asked a raspy voice as if it had been speaking down a drainpipe. I looked around, just in case there was someone else there, but I knew I was alone. No, there's no Luke here. I'm the only one here," I replied, and the voice just hung up. I tried not to think too much about it, but it did get a bit creepy. The next day, the phone rang again at the same time, and it was the same guy again asking for Luke. After this happened once or twice more, I decided to ask my boss. "Hey, was there someone called Luke who worked here before?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He barely looked up from his pile of papers and replied, "Yes, he worked the night shift a while ago, but he quit a few months ago." "Why do some guys keep calling asking about him?" I muttered to myself, a little frustrated. My boss was not so calm anymore. Then he looked up, and I saw concern in his expression. "If they keep calling, let me know," he said, and I nodded. But the calls not only didn't stop, they became more insistent. Every other night I'd hear the same voice on the other end of the line. It was like a broken record, no small talk, just that question about Luke. Finally, my boss decided I should stop answering, and I did. But then something strange happened. It was after 2 a.m. I was flipping through a magazine when I heard the doorbell ring. I looked up, expecting to see a lost trucker or something, and there he was. A tall guy in a dark coat and a hat that covered part of his face. His boots echoed on the tiled floor as he walked towards me. "Are you Alex?" he asked in a deep, menacing voice. I nodded, trying to remain calm, but my heart was pounding. "Yes, I'm him," I replied, feeling the tension in the room grow. He came closer and his dark eyes scanned me. "I've been looking for Luke," he said, and the air seemed to grow heavier. Yes, you called, but he doesn't work here anymore," I stammered. His expression didn't change, but I could feel the temperature in the room drop. "Where is he?" he insisted. "I don't know. He quit before I arrived," I explained, feeling a knot in my stomach. "Surely you know," he whispered dangerously, and a chill ran down my spine. "I swear to you I don't know him. I'm just his replacement," I replied, feeling a cold sweat. He stared at me as if he were deciding whether or not to believe me. "If I don't find him soon, maybe you can pay what he owes me," he growled before turning around and leaving. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me completely frozen in the darkness of the gas station. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to calm down. Something wasn't right. This wasn't just an ordinary customer looking for a former employee. This guy seemed to be looking for Luke as if it were a matter of life and death. And somehow, I had gotten myself into this. The following nights were a real chaos. The man kept coming back, and sometimes he would stand outside, looking at me through the glass like a predator stalking its prey. Other times, he would come in as if he had every right in the world, walking through the corridors, as if he were waiting for me to give him something. The calls also continued, always the same question about Luke. With each time it happened, the feeling that something bad was about to happen grew stronger and stronger. I felt like I had gotten into something much bigger than I could handle, so I decided to do some research. I located some former employees online and managed to find one who knew Luke. After wringing some information out of him, I knew what had happened. Jerry had gotten into trouble with a local mobster who was in the loan and collection business. It all started when he borrowed some money, made a couple of mistakes, and now these guys were looking for him, wanting to collect. His job at the gas station was just a way to hide, but he had given up when things got too intense, and the guy who showed up there was in fact one of those collectors. With that information in mind, I sat down to think about what I could do. I could just ignore him and pretend I didn't know anything. But it was already too late for that. The man was getting more and more impatient and aggressive with each visit. And now that I knew what I knew, I felt like I couldn't sneak away. I decided that the only way out would be to find Luke. I thought that maybe if I tracked him down, I could put an end to it all. So after some more research, I finally managed to find him, hiding out in a rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city. When I knocked on his door, I noticed that his face went pale, as if he knew exactly why I was there. "Listen, I don't want any trouble," he said, backing away as I entered. "I'm out," he continued. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Me neither, I tried to calm down a bit. But that guy, the one who's looking for you, he's not going to let this go. Luke put his hands to his head, clearly overwhelmed. I'm dead, aren't I? I don't even know, I said. But we have to figure this out. We spent most of the night putting a plan together. It wasn't perfect, but it was the only one we had. The next time the man came to the gas station, I would take him to Luke. However, we decided we wouldn't go alone. The guy showed up again, as expected. He came in like he owned the place, frowning when he saw me behind the counter. I'm not in the mood for games, Alex, he growled. Where's Luke? I took a deep breath and said, I can take you to him. And his gaze changed immediately. And for the first time, I noticed a flash of curiosity behind his anger. Did you find him? I nodded. He's waiting. I'll take you there, but you have to leave me alone afterwards. The expression on his face didn't change, but he gave me that cold, terrifying smile as he followed me outside. I took him to an empty street where Luke was waiting in a car with the engine running. As we approached, Luke got out of the car with his hands up. Okay, I'll pay you what I owe, he said. But the guy wasn't there to negotiate. I could see in his eyes that he was ready to teach Luke a lesson, so I knew I had to act fast. Without thinking, I grabbed a baseball bat that I'd hidden under the counter and threw it with all my might. The blow stunned him, but it wasn't enough to keep him out for long, so I shouted at Luke, who seemed too shocked to move. And together we jumped into the car and sped away from the gas station. My heart was pounding as we left the man in the parking lot, trying to process everything that had happened. Luke was silent as we drove down the dark road ahead of us. Although the danger was not yet over, for the first time in weeks I felt a small sense of relief. We weren't out of this mess yet, but at least Luke wasn't facing it alone anymore. And neither was I. A few years ago, I was applying for jobs because it was about time I got my act together and found work. One day, while sending applications online, I received a call from my friend Max. I told him what I was doing, and then, out of the blue, he asked me, "Why don't you come and work with me?" Max worked in one of those sleazy motels, and although I know they didn't pay him much, any job was better than nothing. I asked him what I needed to do to get the job, and he told me that I should just go to the motel and fill out an application. He told me that they were apparently looking for people and that if I put him down as a reference, they would probably give me the job without any problem, so the next day I took his advice and went to the motel. It was the first time I had set foot in the place, and it was just as Max had said, a tremendous mess. I went into the office, if you could call it that. It was like one of those motels with doors that split in two, and instead of a room number, it said office in plastic letters. Inside, there was an older man sitting at a makeshift desk, and when I told him I was a friend of Max's and had come to fill out an application, his face lit up. He said that Max had mentioned that he would be leaving soon. After a while of searching through papers, they gave me the application. The form was a simple disaster. It only asked for basic information. I spent a few minutes writing and filling in the blanks. Then I gave the paper to the guy, who took a few seconds to glance at what I had written. After that, he asked me if I had worked on anything like this before, and I said no, so he just asked me a little more about when I could start and how much time I had available. In the end, he was satisfied because I told him he could start whenever necessary. He told me that he and his wife would be leaving the city soon and that he would need to teach me a few things before they left. Before he closed his suitcase, we agreed that I would start training with him the following day. I thanked him for his kindness, we shook hands, and I left with a mixture of nerves and excitement. I called Max on the way home to tell him that I had got the job and that I would start the following day, and he congratulated me. I couldn't even believe it. I had finally found something. The next day, I woke up feeling a bit shaky. You know, I had those nerves you get before a first time. I met my boss the day before, so that helped, but I still felt a bit out of place. However, once I arrived, I realized that it wasn't as stressful as I thought. It turns out that the training was going to be quite quick as the owner was leaving in just 3 days, so it wasn't a complicated job at all. But there were a lot of things to learn in a short time. How to check guests in and out, fill out different forms, process payments, clean rooms in a specific way, and a myriad of problems that might come up. After those 3 days, I would have to do my first shift with Max, and then, voila, I would be on my own. Doing the shift with Max was a great experience. Everything went smoothly and I hardly had to ask him for help, so my confidence grew immediately. Then came my first shift alone. I was told that I would work at night because the motel was open 24 hours a day. Max assured me that those hours were the quietest, that I should only wait for a guest to arrive and ask for a room. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll be sleeping but have my number handy, so call me if you need anything." The first part of my shift was completely calm. I was on my phone, killing time, until around 2 a.m. when I noticed a car pulling into the parking lot. A guy got out of it and he looked a bit disheveled. He started looking around until he realized where the office was and he walked over to me. "Hello, sir, can I help you?" I asked. The guy gave me a weird look as if he were trying to solve a puzzle or something before finally blurting out, "A room, please." I asked him if he only needed a room for the night and he nodded, so I gave him a form and asked for his ID and credit card, which he provided without any problem. As I entered his information into the system, I noticed something strange out of the corner of my eye. I looked over, and the guy was as if trying to squash something that didn't exist in the air, spinning around as if dealing with a cloud of invisible flies. I tried to ignore it, but I found it strange. Anyway, I finished the registration and thanked him before giving him the key. He just looked at me for a while as if he was going to ask me something else, and then he left. I was left thinking that it had been a bizarre situation, but I decided it wasn't worth thinking about too much. I went back to playing on my phone, and suddenly the silence around me was broken by some distant shouting. I couldn't make out what was being said, but they were clearly getting closer, and just before I realized it, the strangely behaving guy burst into the office, visibly upset and shouting that he couldn't get into his room. The catch was that I didn't know whether to laugh or get nervous. I looked at him while he shouted that there was something wrong with the door or the room. "What's going on?" I tried to find out, but he was in his own world, as if he were about to lose his mind. This situation was getting out of control, and part of me wanted Max to be there to sort it out, while another part of me still felt like I was in the middle of a horror movie. What was I going to do now? Suddenly, the guy started screaming like crazy. "I can't get into my room. Why won't you let me in?" I felt a little scared. The man's hostility was palpable, although I tried to stay calm. I apologized professionally. I assured him that there must have been a mistake and that I had probably given him the wrong key, and this seemed to calm him down a little. Then he grabbed the key from my hand and left. Slamming the door behind him, you could tell he was quite annoyed. To be honest, I thought I had given him the right key, but I just hoped I had made a mistake that could now be resolved. A few minutes passed, during which I continued to feel anxious, as if something terrible was going to happen. And of course, what I feared happened. Before I knew it, the man returned to the office, shouting even louder than before. "I can't get into my room," I heard again. The closer he got, the more scared I became, so I did the only thing I could think of. I went into the back office. I knew he had seen me go in there, but I really didn't want to face him. But the man started banging on the door, demanding that I let him in. Then he started wandering around like a madman, muttering things I didn't quite understand, although I did hear him shout, "Kill her! Someone has to kill her!" I had no idea who or what he was referring to, but deep down I hoped he wasn't talking about me. My heart was pounding, and I told him I was on a call and would be out any minute. I know the right thing to do would have been to call the police, but it was my first night alone and I didn't want to make a scene or worry my boss, who was out of town. So taking a deep breath, I told him I would go with him to his room to help him open the door. That seemed to have some effect because he finally calmed down enough for me to open the door. I took the key and we started walking towards his room. I was walking in front, feeling like I was in an episode of a horror series, and every so often I would turn to look at him because I didn't trust this guy. As soon as I got to his door, I realized he wasn't there anymore. I looked and saw him just a few doors down in another room, pointing at me. He asked me if I was going to try to open it, and that's when it finally dawned on me. This guy had been trying to get into the wrong room all along, and that explained why the keys weren't working. As politely as I could, I told him I was at the wrong door, but his face reflected total confusion. When I opened the door to his room and gestured him inside, he finally seemed to realize what was happening. He then walked to the door, accepted the key, and went in, closing the door behind him. I breathed a sigh of relief and quickly returned to the office, hoping not to run into him again that night. The rest of the night passed without incident, and I never saw that man again. When I returned to work the following night, I found out that he was no longer there. I worked at that motel for a year and definitely had a lot of strange experiences, but that night always stood out as the most terrifying. I never found out what happened to him or who he was talking to when he was shouting, but he definitely gave me a good scare. About 16 years ago, when I was 21, I was working at a gas station in southern Michigan. I was in charge of the shop, which was open 24 hours a day. For several years, I worked the night shift, so as you can imagine, I used to be quite alone. Working nights has its pros and cons. The positive side is that there aren't many customers, which makes the job more bearable. But the problem is that for some cosmic reason, there seem to be more weirdos about at night, and the story I'm about to tell you is based on a disturbing encounter with one of those people. The gas station was right in front of a couple of Walmart-like stores, a busy place during the day. There was also a main road nearby, and the gas station was on a corner. All the surrounding businesses closed at 10 or 11 at night. So after that hour, everything got very quiet until 6 in the morning. At first, I felt a bit strange with so much solitude, but after a few weeks I got used to it. In reality, between midnight and 5 a.m., very few people came in. I reckon that probably only 4 or 5 people came in during that time, one customer per hour, more or less. On one of those Wednesday nights, I was in chill-out mode. It was around 2 a.m. and I was behind the counter, and there wasn't a soul in the shop. There weren't any cars at the gas stations either. Suddenly, I saw a car approaching. It was a white van, one of those creepy ones, like the ones in movies where bad things happen. It slowly parked in one of the spaces in front, and I thought that someone was going to get out and come in. So I tried to make myself a little more comfortable because, to be honest, at that time of night, I was usually lying there with my feet up, watching a movie or listening to music. But to my surprise, no one got out of the van. The vehicle remained parked with its lights on for quite a while, so I kept looking at it, waiting for someone to finally decide to get in. But after 20 minutes, the van finally reversed. Okay, it looks like it's leaving, I thought. Maybe he regretted whatever it was he came to do, but instead he moved to the side of the building and parked where I could no longer see him, which did strike me as odd. In the middle of the night, a little fear began to creep in. I always tried to stay calm and not panic, but at that moment, my instinct told me that something was wrong. A few minutes later, I noticed that the van was still there, only I could no longer see it. My mind started to invent stories about what could be happening. I thought of all kinds of horror movie scenes. What if it was just waiting? What for? The sound of a clock striking the wall was the only noise in the place, and every second felt like an eternity. I knew there was only a little while left on my shift, but with that feeling in the air, the minutes seemed to drag on. After a while, I decided the best thing was to distract myself, so I turned on the television in the mini break room, but I could hardly concentrate. I couldn't stop thinking about the van. It was strange, but I had the feeling that I was being watched, so I picked up the phone and decided to call a friend. I needed to shake off that uneasiness, but there was no answer. The real concern sent a chill down my spine. Wouldn't it be safer to go and see what was going on? But at the same time, the rational part of me said it was best to stay where I was. And so I continued, with my heart racing, wondering if I would ever know what happened to that van in the stillness of that night. After the van had slipped down the side of the building, about an hour had passed. It was now after 3 a.m. and the shop was deserted. Only one car came to fill up, but what really caught my attention was when I saw a guy walking down the sidewalk towards the entrance. I wondered if he was the same guy who had been driving the van. The man was wearing a black winter jacket, so I could only see the shadow of his face because he was looking at the ground. When he reached the doors, he went in and turned right, away from the counter. I didn't know whether to look away or not, so I decided to distract myself with my phone. But after a few minutes, I looked up and there he was, standing about 12 meters in front of me, with a defiant look on his face. His expression looked quite disturbing, as if he had anger etched on his face, and he had a strange posture with his legs apart and his hands in his jacket pockets staring at me. I'm not going to lie to you. I felt quite scared, but also quite confused. His attitude was anything but normal, and I had no idea what he wanted, but after about 10 seconds of uncomfortable stares, I decided to act. I greeted him kindly and asked if he needed help, but he said nothing. He just stood there like a statue. I asked him again if he was okay, and again, silence. The tension was palpable. I felt like I was trapped in an 80s horror movie. Eventually, after what seemed like an eternity, the guy simply turned around and left the shop. He walked back along the pavement and went to the back of the building. Less than a minute later, I saw the white van driving away, and at that moment, I let out a sigh of relief. That weird guy was gone, and I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The rest of my shift was quite uneventful, fortunately. Some customers came in and I managed to relax a bit, but the image of that guy looking at me like I was a psychopath kept haunting me. I couldn't stop thinking about how strange it had been, so out of curiosity, I decided to take a look at the aisle where he had been. Everything seemed to be in order, nothing out of place, but his behavior still gave me the creeps. 3 or 4 nights passed without any problems. I didn't know if I had managed to forget it or if I was just lucky, but a few days later, around 2 a.m., I found myself alone in the shop again. There were no customers, no activity at the pumps, and that was when I saw a car enter the gas station. My horror grew when I realized it was an old white van, exactly like the one from the other night. Everything I had tried to ignore came back to me. I couldn't help but wish it wasn't the same guy. At that moment, anxiety washed over me and my hands began to sweat as my heart raced. As the van approached the pumps, my mind was filled with terrifying thoughts. What does this guy want? Why is he back? I sat there feeling fear take hold of me. The afternoon passed slowly and every second became an eternity as I waited, with only the neon light illuminating the darkness of that eerie night. And there I was, lost in thought as fear crept back towards me like a shadow, wondering if I would have to face the stranger again who had left a trail of terror in my mind. This time, the white van drove very slowly past the gas stations and headed for the front parking spaces. Then it turned and began to back up towards one of the spaces. I stood there watching the van for several minutes, unable to take my eyes off it. Suddenly, I heard the sound of a door opening and soon saw the same guy getting out of his van. He went to the back and opened it, and I don't know how to explain it, but he managed to get out with an object that looked like a crowbar. I tried to focus my eyes, but it really did look like a metal crowbar. Then he closed the rear doors of his van and began to walk slowly towards the entrance of the shop. Yes, he was wearing the same clothes and his attitude was just as strange. Instantly, a bad feeling came over me. I saw him approaching the entrance doors, and when he entered, he turned and went to the back of the shop. At that moment, everything became terribly quiet. My heart was pounding in my ears and a feeling of panic came over me. About 5 minutes passed and suddenly I heard a loud bang, as if the guy had hit something, maybe with the crowbar. There were loud noises afterwards as if he was breaking things. At that moment, I felt completely terrified, thinking that at any moment he was going to jump over the counter and hit me with that thing, but I couldn't move a single muscle. After a few seconds of absolute tension, I noticed that he was approaching, and I saw him about 5 meters away, looking at me with the same defiant expression as before, but now wielding the iron crowbar. That was enough to activate my survival instincts. Without thinking, I darted behind the counter and ran towards the exit. I wasn't being paid enough to stay there and face the madman, so I drew strength from where I didn't have any and ran to my car. Once safely inside, I locked the door and called the police, trying to calm down while keeping an eye on the shop. I parked behind the gas pump, keeping a good distance. A few minutes passed, and finally I saw the guy come out of the store, as if nothing had happened. He went to his truck and got back in. Less than a minute later, the cops arrived, and I ran out to tell them what had happened. We went into the shop together, and what we saw was a complete mess. There were things on the floor. The place was in chaos because the guy had been hitting everything with his crowbar, as if he had gone completely mad. While the security cameras showed everything, we saw the man breaking the shelves and then leaving calmly. It was the most surreal scene I had ever witnessed. After that incident, the police tried to track down the guy and they sent an officer to guard the shop at night. But I decided to resign a few days after what happened. Later, I found out that the guy had returned a couple of weeks later. To be honest, I feel very lucky to have left that job in time. I never found out what they did to him, but I know that if I'd been there, it probably wouldn't have been a good experience. And so I ended my chapter at that gas station, leaving behind not only a job, but a story that I will never forget.